بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So this today, inshallah, we'll be talking about chapter 5, in where Imam Ghazāli, he actually talks about the qualities of man, and he breaks these down into four, right? So he calls it like I think it's like a Rabbani, Shaitani, the beastly, I think Wahshi, and brutish. I forgot what the fourth one that he calls. But basically, these are the translations of the four qualities of man. When he talks about lordly here, though, he's not talking in a good sense, right? He's not talking about, okay, like this is like a divine type quality. He's talking about the quality of wanting to oversee things. Does that make sense? Like he's talking about lordly in that sense. He's not talking about
Mhm.
lordly like in a positive sense, like, okay, like he has, there are characteristics that have come from him, like in a divine way, that he's using in a positive way. Like, and even if you look at all four of these like individually, they're all pretty negative. Right there, there are, it's not really positive, if you just kind of look at this like, wow, man doesn't really have any good qualities at all. But as we discuss a little bit more into this, and we talk about Ghazali's presentation, it actually makes sense, and you find how he steers the conversation in a way where he turns a lot of these qualities into something positive. So these are the four that we mentioned, right? So and then he brings a likeness for each of these. So the lordly characteristic that an individual has, or this person has, this desire to kind of rule and to to dictate. He likens that to a sage. And a sage is it's somebody who has, like, knowledge, and somebody who's revered, within a particular community. Then he talks about the demonic, and he says this is very much like a demon, like a shaitan. Beastly he equates to a dog, and brutish he equates to a pig. And these two examples, I find them coming again and again, right? So Ghazali uses them a lot. And what are the characteristics he's actually trying to point out very specifically concerning the dog and concerning the pig? Do you guys know? Or who would like?
Anger, and
Appetence.
shahwa, appetence.
Ahsan, ahsan. So he's talking about ghadab and shahwa, right? So when he talks about the dog, he focuses a lot on anger, and it's interesting he uses the dog for that versus other animals. Why do you guys think he uses the dog?
Most common to his time angry animal.
Right. So the thing is with the dog, like even camels would be considered like pretty angry animals. Interestingly enough, Ghazali was not Arab. Obviously, he was Farsi, so maybe that's why camel is not the first thing that came to mind for him. But the dog, you associate aggression with dogs, right? So when we think about dogs, we usually associated aggression with them, and I think that's why you have this beastly or this anger type thing. And then pigs, we always associate with appetence, right? This inability to kind of stop satiating themselves and to keep eating, and in this constant desire and pushing after shahwa. So now, looking at these four things, you would think like, all right, well, I have all of these, sucky traits. Well, how do I use these for good? What are the ways that I can actually use these for my favor, to draw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor for me? And he says that all of these characteristics, they very much work like a mirror for the person. So when I look at the mirror, if I have a clean mirror, then this will allow me to use those characteristics in the way that they were meant to be, and in a divine way. And if it is tarnished, it's dirty, then I will not be able to see a true reflection of myself. And this idea of a mirror is something that really boils down to this idea that of honesty, right? So when you talk about sidq, when you talk about honesty, it's about being honest not only with others, but being honest with ourselves. Because if I'm not honest with myself, then I'll never be able to look at that mirror and see the reality, because this is exactly what Ghazali is talking about, that in order for me to perceive myself, and again, remember, this the focus of this entire chapter has been on the self, right? At no point has he talked about judging others or talking about others, right? He keeps talking about how is it that I make myself, how is it that I fix myself, how is it that I try to achieve and get to the next level. And a very important part of that is this mirror, right? Is this mirror. So what are the things that tarnish that mirror? And what are the things that we can do to clean that mirror? I guess we can do a raising the hand thing. That'll be a little bit easier for me to call on you guys. In the meantime, if you're not speaking, if you could just mute yourself. Anyone? Nizam, go ahead.
He talked about sins that make our mirror, i.e., our heart, to harden and to darken.
Okay. I agree with that. So number one, it would be sins, right? Sins are the thing that actually cause that tarnish. And we have a hadith sahih where the Prophet ﷺ said that every time an individual does a bad deed, then a stain comes on his heart, or a black stain comes on his heart. And obviously the heart he's talking about is not the physical heart. You don't have people like doctors who do heart surgery say, oh, this guy's a real sinner. So he's talking about the spiritual heart in that sense. Good. So sins. Like how do we clean our hearts then? And somebody else had raised their hand. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Uthman.
Yeah, you say one of the way is to do dhikr.
Ahsant. Why is that? So I think another follow-up question would be for both of you. Why is it that sins darken the heart? Or why is it that sins tarnish the mirror? And why is it that dhikr clears up this mirror? Like what inherently is involved in both of these things? I think Uthman, and then Uthman, you had something to say, or your hand is just still up from the last time you raised it?
From the last time, I think.
Okay.
How do you lower it down?
I think you have to click it again.
Oh,
The
nice.
same button, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Faik, go ahead.
Basically, I guess like the heart's like a container, and that if you're always, if your heart basically belongs to Allah, then it's sort of it's difficult for it to get tarnished because you're constantly in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you're less likely to do sins.
Okay, and I think that's very valid. But I guess my question would be, why is it that sins tarnish this container, or why is it that sins affect what's in the container? And why is it that dhikr clears out or purifies that container? What is inherent in both of those things that cause that reaction?
Is it disobedience to Allah?
Which is what sin is, right? Zishan, go ahead.
But that's exactly what I was going to say, disobedience and obedience.
Okay, so disobedience and obedience, even if we look at, again, fundamentally, you guys are absolutely right. But what you've managed to do, you've managed to turn good deeds and sins and just use another word to describe them. Zishan, your hand is still raised, or you have something to add? Okay, no.
That was it, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Anyone else? Yeah, what is it inherently that causes these things? And why dhikr specifically? It's I just really find it interesting that out of all of the deeds Ghazāli could have mentioned, he mentions dhikr. And that is the key, wallahu alam, to the answer that to the question, or the answer to the question that he's presenting here. When an individual is in a state of sin, or an individual is in the state of dhikr, what is the difference between these two states? Zishan.
You're in a state of purity when you're making zikr.
Okay, hold on to that thought. Uthman.
Yeah, I think you're more reflective, and because of the fear of Allah Ta'ala, you wouldn't want to engage in sin.
Hello. You guys are all on the right track. And when I'm sinning, what happens?
When I am sinning is I'm instead of ghafla. How do you translate that?
Jade, and that's the key. Faik, let's talk to somebody who has a better translation.
Well, one thing about when you're sinning, you're basically, the way he describes it is you end up you're actually worshiping those negative elements in your heart, like the pig or the dog, in a sense, because you're worshiping your desires
Okay.
rather than
Why word it like that? What is he trying to say? Huh?
because it's basically your heart is basically tied to those things in the dunya or whatnot, right? And so that basically it's preoccupied. And then he also describes that it's rusted, like a container that's like rusted and then upside down. And I feel like he says it upside down on purpose because
Yeah.
when it's upside down, it can't hold anything.
It can't hold anything. Mumtaz. Wallah, Jamil. So I think the ghafla, preoccupied, I really like those answers. Zishan, go ahead. And then after you, Nazim.
No, sorry, my hand should have been lowered.
Okay. No problem. Nazim, go ahead.
So the translation goes as remembrance is the door to mystical unveiling, and mystical unveiling is the door to the greatest success, i.e., meeting God the Exalted.
So we'll talk about Kashf, and we'll talk about all of those things in a little bit more detail. But I think fundamentally, Uthman, Faiq, and like even Zishan, all you guys hit the nail on the head. The idea is that you become distracted, right? That's exactly what it is. You become preoccupied, you become distracted, and this is what ghafla is, yeah, Uthman. So if you said preoccupied or distracted, both of those are good translations for the term. Meaning that when I sin, I'm now turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm forgetting Allah. And the more I sin, the more I forget. Versus turning toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more I remember him, the clearer my remembrance will become. And it'll keep me further away from contaminating my container. To the point that Faik mentions, that, quoting Ghazāli, that the container is now ready to hold, right? It's not upside down anymore. It's actually turned right side up, and it can actually hold this dhikr. And when you hold that dhikr, someone might go, and just like Nazim mentioned, that, okay, well, now that I remember him, now what? Isn't that the goal? No, that's not the goal. Right? That is a means to an end. The end is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rida. The end is getting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be pleased with me as an individual. And the only way for me to do that is to start with these adhkar, to start with remembrance. And dhikr is a very general term. Dhikr is a very general term. It can be used in a number of different ways, in a number of different manifestations. And because you have so many of these quote unquote adhkar, they open up these gateways. And what are these gateways? These gateways are levels drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah knows best. And this is why it's mentioned in this way. And it's the example of the mirror is a really beautiful one because it allows you to see the reality, right? It allows for us to see what is true about ourselves and what we can actually correct. Because what is the purpose of a mirror? At the end of the day, what is the purpose of a mirror? Why is it that we need these mirrors or every day before we leave or, when we use the bathroom or whatever? Why is it that we need these mirrors? What is the purpose of a mirror? You guys anybody can raise their hand and answer. Uthman.
See my reflection on how I look.
Okay, why are you looking at your reflection?
If there's something, which is bad so that I can fix it.
Mumtaz. Hello. Well, that's really, you want to see if there are any imperfections so that you can correct them, right? Is there any chocolate on my face? Is my hair combed, right? Am I looking presentable, right? This is the purpose of that mirror. Faik, do you want to add something?
No, I was going to say exactly that. It's like a check.
Okay, mashallah. And that's exactly what it is, man. And that is the purpose of this mirror, is to better ourselves, because in bettering ourselves, we are trying to better our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something that is really important, right? And this is the final example that Ghazāli mentions here in talking about how to deal with ourselves, because it is that honesty is what it will draw us nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not just that, this reality will actually help us draw nearer to others. And why is that? Why do you think this idea of having this mirror is so important when it comes not only to my relationship with Allah, but to my relationship with others? When I'm looking in this mirror, what is happening? What's going on? Faik.
I guess in a sense, you're probably a better person because you're not sinning, right? So
Okay, so that's one thing, right? You're busying yourself. You're busying yourself with worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What else? What is it that I'm not doing? When I'm looking in this mirror, what is it that I'm not doing? Ah, Uthman.
I'm not focused on other people or you.
Mumtaz. So, and Ghazali here, he's giving us these keys, right? He's telling us exactly what it is that we need to do. If you want to draw near to Allah, and we all do, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his rida, we only need to do two things. We need to make sure that we are busying ourselves in remembering him, and busying ourselves in bettering ourselves, and busying ourselves in focusing on that, and staying away from sin, and by not focusing on others. And there's, you know, in that, what is that urge then? You know, you might have individuals come to you and be like, okay, so I shouldn't say anything to the people around me. Based on what we're talking about and based on what we're studying here, how can we answer that? That we should focus on ourselves and we shouldn't worry about others. What does that mean? Does it mean that if I see somebody lying, I shouldn't say anything? Does it mean that if I see somebody not giving his zakat, I should stay silent? What does that mean to focus on myself? Tafadhal, Uthman.
I think this is subjective and depends on what your authority is. Masalan, you are the Imam in the masjid.
Yeah.
So you can address if, say, for example, Sayyid Ibrahim does a mistake. But I cannot come as Uthman and just, come and correct him. That is not my place to do that. But sometimes I can advise in a good way, right? In a beautiful way, to just as a reminder, not to put somebody down, meaning talk down upon them.
Okay, because when I'm correcting my mistake, there are a few things that can come to mind, and there are a few things that can happen. What is the reason that I'm correcting his mistake?
Biwajhillah,
If you're doing it, and this goes back to that mirror, right? This goes back to that sidq, this goes back to that ikhlas. I need to ask myself, why is it that I'm correcting this person? Am I correcting him because I want to show off my knowledge? Am I correcting him because I want to show off my position? Or am I correcting him because I really do love him and I want him to improve as a brother? Because we have a number of hadith. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ra'a minkum munkar," that whoever amongst you sees a munkar, sees an evil thing, so he has to change it with his hand, and if he can't, he changes it with his tongue, and if he can't, he should hate it in his heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, and that is the weakest level of iman. The other thing that we need to focus on, like when we talk about correcting others also, is what is it that I'm correcting? If there is something that there's a difference of opinion on, or there's something that's a different, maybe that person follows a different madhab, is that a munkar? That's something we really need to sit down and we really need to think about. Is what this individual doing actually a munkar, or is it something that I disagree with as an individual? And if it's not munkar, if he's praying with his hands to his side, if he's giving zakat on his wife's jewelry, whatever the situation might be, right? There's so many things that there's so much khilaf on. If I decide something is munkar, who does that thing become munkar for? I want you to think about that question. If I feel something is munkar, then who is that thing munkar for? Right? It's munkar for me. Meaning that if I do it, I will be held accountable. Not if he does something that I don't like. I have to hold him accountable. That's not how it works. That's not how relationships work. This is part of ukhuwat al-Islam. That he differs from me, and I'm still going to tolerate that difference. The very famous hadith, Bukhari, where you have the companions saying about each other when we were traveling, and this is during Ramadan. The Sa'im wouldn't say anything to the muftir, and the muftir wouldn't say anything to the Sa'im. The one who was fasting, he would stay silent about the one who didn't fast. And the one who didn't fast, he would stay silent about the one who was fasting. This is tolerance. And this is how we should learn how to deal with each other. And this is how we should learn how to respect one another. They were so engrossed in their own personal deeds that when they saw something and it wasn't evil. Again, munkar. It's very important that we understand that. They would let their brother live, and they would allow them to continue doing whatever it is that they were doing. Versus being hypersensitive like we are about what other people do and how they are doing those things. So anytime we are in a situation where something like this comes up, we really need to ask ourselves one of two questions, or both questions. Why am I doing this action? Am I really doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And secondly, is what this person doing actually a munkar? And in all honesty, anything outside of the 5 pillars, anything outside of the 5 pillars, you will find khilaf. I can almost guarantee it. Anything outside of the 5 pillars of Islam, you will find khilaf outside of it. And anything you find outside of those things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly made impermissible, gambling, drinking alcohol, eating pork, lying, stealing, etc. Anything outside of those things that is agreed on, you will also find a khilaf in that. So it is very important we learn how to define munkar, so that we learn how to deal with one another, and so that we learn how to talk to one another. There's just too much focus. Like taqwa is an internal characteristic. It's not an external one. Like where we go and we impose it on other people. My taqwa is my own. My taqwa is my own. It's not, it's not like a group taqwa. it's mine. And this defines my relationship with Allah. I don't define other people's relationship with Allah. So this was the last thing to talk about in this chapter, and I just really, really loved this example that Ghazāli gives of the mirror, because it just really helps hyper focus on what it is that's happening, and how he uses sin and dhikr as polar opposites of how this thing is tarnished. And the reason it's tarnished is because all of it revolves around remembering Allah, keeping Allah in mind, which is taqwa. That is taqwa. Keeping Allah, having that God consciousness, having that constant awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of our actions. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the muttaqeen. If you guys have any questions, inshallah, I'll open the floor up for related questions. Nazim, go ahead.
Could you elaborate on the mystical unveiling?
Okay, so the mystical unveiling is basically kashf. Kashf is it can manifest itself in different ways. So sometimes, for example, it'll be that intuition that we have on not to take a certain path. Sometimes it'll be reading a verse and then finally understanding what that verse means, right? Allah unveiled to you the meaning at that point, even though you might not have read any more books of tafsir, even though you might not have come across anything else, but all of a sudden, because of some experience that you had, or because you had come across that verse so many times, you finally reach a point where you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing you, and you understand what it is that he's telling you. Sometimes it'll give you insight into some unseen things, right? You might call up your sister and be like, hey, listen, I think you're going to have a girl. And she'll be like, I'm not even carrying, I'm not even pregnant. What are you talking about? And 6 months down the line, or a few months down the line, you find out that she's pregnant and she's having a girl. So this is what kashf is, right? Kashf is this type of an unveiling that individuals might receive at some point. And it can manifest itself in different ways. Saying that, it's not a condition. It's not necessary that everybody receives this kashf. Even striving for it is a fallacy. Like you can't strive for that. We have to strive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, and it is a gift from him if he decides to give us that unveiling, whether it be through a certain dhikr, right? It might be a certain remembrance that we do, and we might have done that, istighfar, for example, we might have done it 1,000,000 times in our lifetime, and there comes a point in our life where we finally understand what that istighfar is and what the depth of that means. Does that help clarify a little bit, Nazim?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, because if not, I can open up the floor to unrelated questions, inshallah, and then we'll end for the evening. Klaus, are there any unrelated questions?
Just going back to what he was talking about, the Rabbani here, this wasn't something good, as you mentioned, right? Because when I was reading it, I was confused.
Yeah.
Because this is something like about I, me, myself, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Feel good about yourself.
Yes. And that's not what's intended. So Rabbani, it actually means this lordly quality and this need to kind of control everything. So
then how does our hearts then have something noble then? If it's all something, you know, negative.
because what happens is that you turn these qualities, some of these qualities you actually turn against themselves, and you find a way to, because if you control that Rabbani nature, you have control now over your anger, and you have control over your shahwa, and you will keep your demon away. And when you control your anger and you control your appetence, you can actually use your anger to protect you from those things, meaning that I can use my anger to protect those things from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets angry at. And my shahwa, my desire, I can use it to draw me toward all of those things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to do. So I can actually use my beastly and my brutish qualities as way of pushing away those things which are harmful and pulling in those things which are good for me. Does that help? So it does come across as negative, but if you actually think of it on a very base level, it's not okay. If you think at a very base level, even these qualities can actually be used for good. To the point. Now, the demonic quality, what's interesting about that is that the only person to actually deal with this and take care of this was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even his shaitan aslam. Salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we have a couple questions on leadership, the desire for leadership. Well, it depends. You can be sincere for that. If you want leadership just to rule the people, then mayjuz. It's just a want and a desire to be in control. This is something that's negative. طيب, what if I want to lead the people to khair? What if I want to lead them to good? There's nothing wrong with that. I don't see issue with that. Like, even applying for leadership of positions or seeking those leadership positions, it depends, like, your ability, and you have to constantly check your intention, because being a leader is a job just like any other job. The only reason that we point this one out so much is because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the man came and he said, give me leadership. And the Prophet ﷺ obviously saw something in him that, this isn't a sincere thing that you're seeking. And even you'll find, many people use examples of the scholars of the past, like Sufyan al-Thawri, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, Hasan al-Basri, that these individuals, they ran away from leadership, right? But then you had certain scholars who embraced it. Like, for example, you have Abu Yusuf, who was Abu Hanifa's student. He embraced it, and he was offered a judge position, and he took it. So it really depends. Even you don't have the companions who were given leadership positions, they might have felt shy to take them, but at the end of the day, they took them, right? They accepted them. When the people said, we want you to be a leader, they could have said, no. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited an individual from seeking riyasa, and I don't want riyasa, so you cannot give it to me. And you have to understand, they were in positions where they could have walked away if they wanted to. You think anybody can be forced into do anything? You think Abu Bakr couldn't have walked away, or Umar, or Uthman, or Ali radiallahu anhum? Any of them could have walked away. But they chose, they embraced it. So they're seeking leadership. It depends on what your intention is. It's just very easy for an individual's intention to become corrupted in seeking that. And that's why it's so harmful. And that's why you have many scholars who disavow it and who talk poorly about it, because it corrupts people, and you can look at even Islamic history. The Prophet ﷺ, he even said that the righteous khilafah will extend only for 40 years. And you'll find the end of the 40th year was when Hassan stepped down, right? That was it. So you're talking about 40 years of good Islamic leadership, and then about 1400 years of bad Islamic leadership. You have some gems like here and there, but in general, politics is not it's not a very praiseworthy position. You'll find that many people will look down on politicians and people even getting into politics. Even us ourselves, there are certain positions that I think in general, mankind, we have a negative view toward. One of them is like political leaders, and lawyers also, right? Like we just have these negative connotations associated with those people. And if we look at what their job is actually to deal with other people, right? That's basically what their job is, on either interpreting the law or dealing with other people, or a combination of the two. And these are the people in general, even historically, who we as a people, as humans, forget just Muslims, as humans, we've had problems with those groups of people. Rabbani quality can be negative. It can be negative if it's used in a wrong way. But if I'm using it to yusaytir ala nafsi, if I'm actually using it to control those traits that Allah has given me and using them for good, then it's not negative, right? It's negative for the person who it allows to control him and to consume him. So do we have any other questions? No? خلاص, then I will see all of you next week inshallah, same time. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وجزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
جزاك الله خير.